known in the world of business here in the US as the CEO confidant, and known in Latin America as the president and co-founder of the Wisdom for Kids Foundation. And I'm extremely happy to see here at Expansion Network again, Daniel Blanchard and Daniel Flores. Welcome to Expansion Network. How are you guys?
Wonderful, Angel. Thank you for having us on.
Hi, Angel.
Absolutely. So I was saying again, actually, it's the first time we have Daniel Flores and Daniel Blanchard with us in Expansion Network. But previously we had really met a long time ago, and we had plenty of opportunities to have meaningful and significant conversations. And speaking of kids, we're definitely going to speak about what's going on with our youth and with our kids, because we are right now, and we're very happy to have both of them with us today, because we're going to announce right now the launch of a new book. The book's title is exactly, let me make sure I have it right. It's A Conversation on Education: How Teachers and Paraeducators Can Work Better Together. So maybe a starting conversation before you introduce yourselves to the audience, but do you think that there's room for improvement right now between what the teachers do and what the educators do in general?
What do you think, Dan?
Absolutely. Like I said, we're not data projects, we're people. And anytime you got people, it's complicated, right, Dan?
Absolutely, Dan. It's very complicated, and
there's so many places for things to go wrong and for things not to work out at the optimal experience.
Exactly. I mean, I was gonna jump into what you just said, but let's do it little by little here so that the audience, get a little bit more of context. So let's start with Daniel Blanchard. Could you please explain to the audience a little bit who you are and what you do?
All right, great. Yes, I am an inner city school teacher in Connecticut, which is in New England for the USA. And I teach special education, and I teach high school history, social studies. So I do the special ed and the history, social studies at the high school level. And on the side, I'm an author, speaker, and a whole bunch of other things, including a father of 5.
Only 5. Are you planning to grow your family anytime soon, Daniel Blanchard?
I've already got my own basketball team, so I think I'm pretty good.
Awesome.
5 is enough, right?
Awesome. Yeah, because I met for the first time Daniel Blanchard many years ago, and obviously his family has grown in age and in wisdom for sure. And I was always making jokes about how big his family is, because very often actually we would hold these conversations, and his family members will be in the background sometime, because if something the Blanchard home has is a very tight schedule, I can tell you that. I don't know if that's still the case, but let's talk about that later. So Daniel Flores, would you mind introducing yourself to the audience, please?
Absolutely. Thanks, Angel. And hopefully I can have a big family just like Dan Blanchard. My name's Dan Flores. I've also been working in inner schools just like Dan Blanchard is. I was a former paraeducator for 9 years, and now currently for the last 4 years, been working as a special ed teacher at the middle school level, working with our students with special needs in the area of autism. So I do that. I come with a great wealth in terms of how to work with students, how to work with parents, how to work with staff members of all abilities, because Dan, at the end of the day, if we can get that together, that means is that everybody wins, which is basically the end game.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that we got great perspectives as educators. Dan Flores coming up through the paraeducator ranks. Myself being a teacher in so many different positions with such a wide array of experiences as a regular ed teacher and special ed teacher at many, many different levels and many, many different positions. The two of us just got great experience, and I think we complement each other when we're trying to do things like make that paraeducator and that teacher relationship a better working relationship to help give better results for today's students.
Could you, in order to have like a more like kind of, or to give more context to the audience, could you describe what the paraeducator is? Is a father? I mean, we as parents, are we paraeducators or we are not? Are we considered educators? For the sake of this conversation today, and also for the sake of the book that you're launching today, what do you consider to be a paraeducator?
Great question, Angel. So Angel, so basically by default, right, everyone is an educator, right? Whether you went to formal schooling to, get your bachelor's or master's and anything, right? Like a math teacher, science teacher, so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, whether you are a parent, whether you are tutoring somebody, in a subject, or if you're a child counselor that you basically work with preschoolers, if you're teaching someone, a valuable lesson or like a technique, by essence, you are an educator, like in that sense. Now, a paraeducator, right? It's someone who has a certain amount of college credits or has passed a national or state exam that qualifies them to work in public education or so, right? So basically, a paraeducator, if you want to put it in layman's terms, is another fancy way of saying teacher assistant. That's what they are, right? So a paraeducator can work in a variety of ways, from preschool all the way up to high school. And they primarily work with students with disabilities, students who actually need that extra support. They can also run after school programs. They can also work with students who are non-disabled, right? And they primarily help in 4 categories: academics, behavior management, life skills, and social and emotional support.
Do you think that we could extrapolate this definition of paraeducator to other states in the union?
Well, I would say that many states across the United States have paraeducators that work right alongside the teachers, which makes a lot of sense. 2 adults in the classroom is better than 1 adult in the classroom. And most states do have it, although there's different philosophies as you go through the states. Some states have fewer paraeducators because they see it as another expense that they may not be so happy to partake in.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah. And then there's other states that are like, oh, it's totally worth the expense. Now, we're New England boys up here in the Northeast, in Connecticut, and this region, believes that paraeducators are worth the expense. And there's many states out there that agree that it is worth the expense. There are some states that maybe are struggling a little bit more with their finances, that sometimes have to make tough decisions between bringing on the extra expense of a paraeducator. But, and we get that struggle. That struggle is real. And those states, have, let's say, fewer paraeducators. And that's unfortunate for their students, because their students could benefit from paraeducators being in the classroom, which is a second adult in the classroom, which doesn't cost as much as the first adult, the teacher, the certified teacher in the classroom. So we think it's a win-win. We know financial struggles are real, but the students benefit from having more than 1 adult in the classroom.
And to put it into perspective, Angel, also Dan actually to touch about the salaries, right? An average teacher salary on a national scale is anywhere between $45,000 to $60,000 a year, right? The average salary of a paraeducator is less than $30,000.
Wow.
All right.
Wow.
So yes. So basically based like on the whole continuum, it is cheaper to hire a bunch of paraeducators to go and provide that. But a lot of it has to do with like supply and demand too, right? Because if you don't have a large population of students that require that level of support, districts won't be motivated enough to basically hire them. And that is where that cat and mouse comes in terms of how much can we get away with not hiring additional adult support and just using existing resources, which to me doesn't make any sense, because if you want the kids to win, then you should do whatever you can to make sure that you have every single support that's there, that's available. But a lot of it has to do, and George, with the politics too.
Yeah.
Politicians tend to get in the way because they want to put their stamp on it, and not let the educators who are there in the trenches know what they're doing and allow them to basically work the way that they know best.
I actually, it's beautiful that how this conversation is going, because as you know, my personal brand, my business brand is the CEO Confident. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because I'm always attentive to every single report from the large consulting firms in the world about what's going on in the minds of the CEOs. Why is that relevant to this conversation? Because the number one concern right now of the CEOs worldwide is talent.
Yep.
Recruiting and retaining. Recruiting and retraining. Exactly. Yep. So I know what's going on in the schools of Texas, but that's not my interview. It's your interview. So what about talent? Do you feel right now that, according to your experience, there's a need for talent? There's a need for more teachers. There's a need for, not only more qualified teachers, but also more qualified paraeducators. What's your take on this?
Yes, and yes, and yes. COVID really hurt the educator workforce, both teachers and paraeducators. We're hurting. We need teachers. We need paraeducators. We need educators desperately at all levels. Even state ed departments are desperately hurting for qualified, talented educators. So yeah, yes. And, Dan and I, like Dan just said, we wrote this book to try to give educators, teachers and paraeducators, an additional way to improve their game, to become higher quality educators. But we need more, and we need more ongoing professional development, which is actually another book we're writing right now on professional development for educators.
Absolutely, Dan. And also, Angel, too, the reason why that there's such a vacuum, right, of people like leaving the profession because Dan, I think that there's a stat that says that most people who works in education, especially teachers, they don't make it within like 5 years time or so.
Half of them leave. Half.
And a lot of it has to do more so with the cultural climate of the job, of the profession. Oftentimes, if you read like the New York Times, if you read the LA Times, Washington Post, the majority of teachers across the board, the majority of paraeducators across the board says that there is no actual respect for the actual profession itself. Because one of the things that people tend to forget is that just because you're a teacher doesn't really mean that you can actually be a teacher to work in the classroom. There's a big misconception between a teacher and a professor. If you want to go into a public or private education, right, you're not really teaching 100% of the time, because you're dealing with teaching, managing grades, dealing with parents, right, dealing with behaviors, dealing with referrals, and all other non-essential duties that has nothing to do with teaching. Whereas
data collecting.
Whereas a professor at a community college, online, whatever, they're just teaching. That's it. Therefore, they can go in, they can get into the technical terms, basically explain, assign the work, and then that's it, right?
Yeah.
That's like.
So I think what you're saying is that when the college professors, it's content heavy. When you're a K through 12 teacher, there's a million things you got to do, and you got to do well. You don't have to be the best in the world at them, but you got to do them well. And to do them well, you got to have ongoing professional development. You got to have good relationships with the people you work with, and know those social skills, those skills of synergy. And you got to hopefully have support for yourself, not just professionally, but academically, but also just in the environment. You need to work in an environment that seems, I don't know if you want to use the word nice, but you want to work in an environment where you're not getting emotionally beat up every day.
Yeah.
And many teachers work in environments where they're emotionally getting beat up every day. And then you wonder why half of them leave within 5 years, why there aren't enough teachers, why there aren't enough paraeducators. I mean, it's a tough profession, but it's one of the most rewarding professions out there. When you make it through the chaos and you survive and you see the good you're doing. Unfortunately, half of the profession never gets to see that, because they don't make it through the chaos for one reason or another.
That's right. And also to our folks who are listening to this, to basically put down in layman's terms too. So some of the chaos that Dan Blanchard is talking about, we're not talking about just like misbehaviors. We're talking about, let's say that like a student is failing. Years ago, the mindset was, okay, that student failed because that student failed. Therefore, that whole accountability piece was placed. Now that's in reverse. If a student were to fail, regardless of what subject it is, the blame is not put on the instructor, which is the school, the teacher, because the teacher didn't do enough to make sure that that student passed, which again puts more of that pressure. So you have the whole like academics part of it, right? You have the whole like high stake testing, because schools are based on high stake testing. If they score low, then there's less funding, right? Then you have the whole dealing, now I don't know about you, but I work with the following people on a daily basis, with my students, with my paraeducator, with my school social worker, with the speech therapist, with the school psychologist, with the administrator, with the principal or vice principal, with the
special ed teacher,
behavior support, right? So there's a whole bunch of people that I have to update on a daily basis on where we are, right? Whereas, if you work, again, if you work outside of education, just maybe only 1 or 2 people that you work with, and then that's it. Therefore, the pressure.
Or report back to. We report back to probably a dozen people. Is that what we report back to? I think basically, to make a long conversation short, is teaching is way harder today than it used to be. And then you throw in the ugly politics, and it can be miserable some days with the ugly politics that's going around these days. It's a tough profession, but we're doing our part to try to make, the relationships, the working relationships in the schools for the teachers and the paraeducators, and I guess maybe for all involved, better. And if we can make those relationships better, if we can provide support and maybe ongoing professional development,
absolutely,
maybe teachers will stay around a little bit longer and get stronger and get through the chaos and see, their hard work paying off with the students. Like when a student comes back a couple of years later because they miss you, that's a great thing. That's a great thing.
Exactly. Actually, I am very involved in the education of my kids for many reasons, but very involved. Like I visit the schools very often for many reasons, right? And obviously, I'm very familiar about everything that you said. Not, as you know, not every single parent has the same level of involvement with the education of their kids for whatever reason, right? It could be good reasons, because unfortunately they cannot spend more time, taking care of their kids' education. Again, we have to be compassionate with everybody and understanding. But there's many reasons why, sometimes parents don't get so involved. But you described it very well. And actually, something else that is I would like to add into the equation. You mentioned politics. The main goal of expansion networks is accelerating the consciousness of humanity, and I think that our kids' education is paramount for the future of humanity. It's very, very important, and you guys have the youth in your hands. So, but you mentioned politicians, but also then there's the administrative part of the school, right? The admins of the school, the principals, the vice principals, that also have to transpire all those instructions that come from the district right into the school. So let me ask you a very specific question. So on top of everything that you said, how do you deal with, all those like commandments or orders that the admins receive that you also have to abide by? How do you do it? How can you possibly deal with so much?
If you don't mind me jumping in real quick, I'd like to make a comment on what you said before we answer this. If you got rid of the teachers, we are one generation, maybe 2 the most, away from being thrusted back into the dark ages. I'm saying you need the teaching staff. Now, the amount of initiatives that get thrusted upon us is overwhelming. Overwhelming. People who are not in the profession, they think that teachers come in, work 8 to 2 or 8 to 3 or whatever it is, and then we hang out and during our downtime, read the newspaper. That is not the case. You know what I'm saying? We are multitasking. We are getting here early. We're here so many days before the sun is up. You know what I'm saying? And we are multitasking all day long. We might be eating lunch with a sandwich with one hand and grading papers in the other hand at our desk. We don't even go into the teacher lounges anymore. We stay after school for hours. We bring work home. We could be thinking about class at 9 p.m. If I'm thinking about class 5 a.m. when I'm taking a shower to get ready for work, I'm planning out what I'm going to say, what I'm going to do. You know what I'm saying? So people think that we just leave it at the door at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. No, this job, I dream about it. You know what I'm saying? So this job is like a 24/7. Weekends? No. It's in your head. It's on your kitchen table. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. This job is like a 24/7 job, and the general public has no idea that this is going on. I'm saying, do you want to add anything to that, Dan?
No, the thing is that Dan Blanchard is very true on so many points, because all the stuff he's saying, I actually lived through it literally, when I was a para and even now as a teacher. And one of the things that I'm able to like keep my sanity, if that's what you're asking, is because during this process when both me and Dan, when we were working together, we actually noticed that some people that actually do work in education, those stories you hear about working for over 25 years, 30 years, part of the reason why that they did so well in the same building in the district is because they were able to basically surround themselves with good people who understood them, who vented, who basically go through that journey together, and oftentimes, when I tell folks about, what does it take for you to be successful in education and stay in education, is that you have to, lean on somebody. At the end of the day, Dan, I don't know about you, but all students, whether from pre-K to 12, they all have their services, right? Everyone has their services.
Yes.
The thing is that students come and go. They either graduate, they age out, they transfer. But the one common denominator that makes the school works is the staff. Because if you look about it from like a metric standpoint, the student to staff ratio is kind of big. So for example, in my building, there's over 800 students. And then all staff in, it's less than 200, all in, less than that. But we actually make it work.
Yeah, I see sometimes when I'm working in the high school, between the homeroom, the 5 classes I teach, 30 kids in a class, if I'm coaching, if I'm an advisor, if I'm mentoring, I'm seeing 250, 300 kids a day on some days when I'm working in the high school. But to go back to what Dan just said, teachers by nature are generous. Educators, paraeducators, everybody, the whole workforce by nature is generous. If you stop them in the hallway, they're walking to, their lunch. They may have 20 minutes for lunch, and they will stop and talk to you and give you 5 minutes of their lunch as they're talking. So they're generous by nature. But as Dan said, we lean on each other. We help each other out. We ask each other questions, and we all go the extra mile. There isn't any of that, like that competition sort of thing. Like, I'm not going to give you a lesson plan that I did last year that really worked well because I want to be like a better teacher than you. You don't have that competition sort of thing. It's like, yes, let me show you what worked for me well last year when I was going over the Romans and working on a unit on the Romans. This worked really well for me last year. It might work well for you too. And then Dan later on would go and give that lesson or share that lesson with a teacher, another year. So we lean on each other. We help each other. And I think sometimes, I don't know, maybe it's company by misery, but we don't try to get one over on each other. We don't try to outcompete each other. We help each other. And I think that atmosphere is there among educators, and that helps a lot with those 100 initiatives that are coming down the pike right at us.
Okay. Would you mind like elaborating a little bit on the question I asked you? I know that you wanted to make this preamble, but could you answer the question about, how the relationship and all those things that come from the, politicians and then boards and then the admins of the school, etc. How do you deal with this? What's the relationship? What's the opportunity or the gap that you see in there?
Well, I think that in order to deal with all of that stuff, we have to deal with it one at a time. You know what I'm saying? One initiative at a time, whether it's collecting data, whether it's analyzing data, whether it's the brand new data teams, professional learning communities, or whatever it may be, we have to deal with it one at a time. And we have like checklists, where we just check it off. We got a long checklist, but we check it off. Yeah. And when it comes to the politics, Angel, which you just mentioned, we've had to become more savvy with politics. And we've had to become more careful with what we said. It's kind of a sad day when I'm standing up at the front of the classroom and I've been teaching, I've been doing this for over 25 years, and an administrator comes in to do an observation of me, and I have to sit there and pick my words very carefully on what I say about the lesson and how I deliver it. And then I have to wonder, and I've been called every now and then, somebody calls me a master teacher, but I have to wonder, am I doing this right this year for this new initiative? Am I doing this right? Or am I basically going to get hit over the head after this class by the administrator saying, you didn't do it right this year, but it was right last year, but it's not right this year. So we deal with that stuff. And sometimes we fumble and bumble over our words when we're trying to pick the right words to say in front of the administrator or whatever is in front of us. It's tricky. It's very tricky. And I think it's sad when master teachers have to wonder if they're doing it right.
And so, I mean, you're preaching to the choir here. Again, I'm so involved that I feel this pressure of there's so many more like criteria, so many more constraints. There's specific things you can say, you can express. Be careful not to discriminate against someone or some, and again, I myself, I'm not originally like an American, Caucasian American. I mean, I come from Europe, from Spain, so I can be considered probably like a Hispanic, right? But it's true. There's so many new things, and I would say in the last probably 2-3 years, the number of things that you have to be cautious about has increased dramatically. Would you agree with me that it's like? And let me add something else. I believe. Let me tell you. That's what I see in Texas. I think that it's much easier to deal on this respect with the students themselves and with the parents who are going to understand it more than with even the admins. Would you agree?
I would say so too, Angel. And basically, Angel, based on all the things you said in a nutshell, then I would say is called regulation. This is what happens, right? When you put too much regulations, talking about politics, right? You always hear, we need to have less regulations to basically make the economy moving up, right? But in education, like it kind of works the same way. The more regulations you put in it, the more restrictions you have, and therefore the more chaos that's happening. And that's where the whole frustration is and buildup and staff burnout, right? And going to your point about the whole observations and thinking about that's like more regulation on you. That's what it is. This is the script that they want you to do, right?
And I got to tell you, if I could jump in for 1 second, I've talked to a lot of teachers all over the state, and they're about my age. They're like, let's say, right around 50. And so many of them, Dan, I'm sure you've heard this. So many of them said, if I could just go back to just teaching, I'd still like this job. But now it's got me thinking about retirement constantly.
He's not lying. I hear him all the time. He's not lying.
And we've already got a shortage. And people that are like in their 50s are constantly saying, I think about retirement constantly because I can't just teach anymore. They've taken the fun out of teaching. It is. I mean, I coach sports. I have a great time when I coach sports. When I teach and I see a kid's eye light up because now they finally get something, that's fun. There's joy in bringing forth our next generation. There's joy in that. But the politics, the policies, the regulations, the new initiatives, 100 new initiatives in like 9 years. We went through one time at the school district. It's taken the fun out of teaching. And we're not saying your job's always got to be fun, but it's got to be fun once in a while. Once in a while, it's got to be fun.
Absolutely.
And if it's not fun once in a while, then people are just going to vote with their feet and walk away. And that's what's happening. And then as the education staff is aging, here comes the gray tsunami. So you throw the gray tsunami of all the people retiring in with like the 50-year-olds that are like, what could I do as a second career? Because this just isn't fun anymore. Now you've got something really bad rolling really fast toward American education.
Absolutely too. And these are people too these are people who are leaving that has structural knowledge, right? That they actually know the intricacies of it. And then when you have, about 20% or more that are leaving, that's very hard to fill that because those are jobs, Those are building knowledges that you can't replace that easily.
You lose that institutional knowledge, and it's a brain drain. And that's where we're at. And it's not just the schools. The same exact thing is happening across the country at each state Department of Education. In each state, there's a huge brain drain, and we're headed toward big trouble if something doesn't happen soon and people start to enjoy their jobs. We're doing our little part by saying, let's at least work in relationships in the school. And our next book that we're working on with the ongoing professional development, let's give people, educators a chance to like improve and feel like they have some value as they're constantly getting beat up every day, socially, emotionally, psychologically, getting beat up every day, by the students, by the parents, by the admins, by the politicians, sometimes by the community. They're getting beat up because the teachers become the easy scapegoats. I'm saying? Many of them don't live in the community. They don't vote in the community because many of them are driving into the community they work in. So since they don't have any voting power, they're easy targets to attack while letting other things just slide.
Big time, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that also, as I was listening to you, I guess that among other things, you end up also policing your class, like being if there's so many new regulations and new things that you have to make sure that they are accomplished, right? Or they have to be fulfilled in the classroom. I guess that you also have to, again, you have to treat your student community in a different way because the regulations have changed. So you end up being also policing as a police officer, right? As a law enforcement kind of thing, as a new guidelines and regulations enforcers in the classroom. So does that not also distract you from the main purpose, which is teaching the next generation?
Oh yeah, I think there's way too many decisions, Dan, being made in the ivory towers. They're not in the classrooms. If they were in the classrooms, they would see that this policy doesn't make sense if they were in the classroom. But they're making these policies from, let's say, they're far removed ivory towers of the elite universities, or the politicians are making this, and they're jamming it down the educators' throats, and the educators are just scratching their head going, how's this going to work? You know what I'm saying? And then some of them, you could see that they outright hurt the future education of students, and there's nothing we can do about it.
And also, Angel, Dan, too, what's so funny about this, the whole irony is that people like to talk about education, people like to have their hand in it, but nobody really wants to work with the students directly. Seems to me that people like to, do this, do that. I have a better idea. Okay, show me how. No. Okay, this is the manual. You go ahead and do it. This is the law. But do you want to try to get in the classroom and do what I want to do, which is a completely different story.
Completely different story.
So everybody, it's interesting how education is such a hot topic. People like to talk about it, but nobody wants to get involved and do their day-to-days.
They don't. If you look at the Board of Educations, you'd be shocked by how many people on the Board of Educations are not in education. They are into there's a real estate agent. There's a business owner. You know what I'm saying? There's there's so many other different professions. And I'm not saying that doesn't bring value. That does. But when you have a Board of Education, and let's say there's 9 members, and only one of them is a former educator, we've got a problem with them dictating educational policy, and that which is not their expertise. They don't have any time in the trenches. It's not their expertise, and they're dictating educational policy.
Perfect example. New York City Schools is the largest school district in the United States with an annual budget of over $1 billion a year, right? They used to have their own local board of education system. They've done away with that, and now the person who's solely responsible for the entire district, it's mainly 2 people, is their chancellors and then the mayor.
Politicians instead of educators.
Wow. And how are you perceiving? Obviously, you've been there for a long time. How are the students adapting?
Not good.
What's the reaction? What are you seeing that the students are forced to do without knowing? Because it's just a different environment, right? So what do you see in the students you know, from compared to maybe 20 years or 9 years ago, 25
Great
years
question.
What do you see? Because that's the most important. Yeah, that's the most important thing, right?
Less engagement, right, Angel? Attendance is down. The amount of behaviors has increased. And when I say behaviors, I'm not talking about teasing. I'm talking the amount of fighting that's been increasing, the amount of like illegal drugs or weapons or things that's just like contraband has been entering the school. Language is going up.
Bad language. Bad language. Vulgar, right? Yeah.
Property destruction as well has gotten up. The cell phones too has also been like a huge issue in the schools because students are basically talking to each other to basically plan like stage fighting or plan like huge riots or causing like, you know, these ratings where they're trying to like, you know, get points in their TikToks, whatever.
Or bullying.
And then it's coming at the expense of the instruction time as well as at the expense of other students' feelings as well, you know?
Yeah, and what I'm seeing is, you know, the best students in the country are always going to be the best students in the country. You know what I'm saying? They're going to be capable. But what I think we're both seeing here is that today's students are less capable than they were a decade ago and less capable than they were 2 decades ago. And it's sad. I mean, we're supposed to be doing all these amazing things with all these new policies and new initiatives, and they're making students less capable. And that's our future.
You know what's funny too, Dan, is that I'm willing to bet that 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when you were a student, there wasn't as many policies in place.
There wasn't as many policies in place.
And you could
teach. You could teach, right? You could teach, but there's too many policies, too many initiatives, and the pendulum has swung a little too far in some instances where the onus is on the teacher too much and not on the student. If the student walks into the class and puts their feet up on the desk and the student says, open your book to page 10, and the student knocks the book on the ground, says, I ain't doing that, right? And the student says, well, you need to do it. I mean, the teacher, you need to do that. And the student gets vulgar and threatens the teacher and walks out of the class, and the teacher doesn't yell, doesn't do anything that would make the kid do that. When a principal and a parent comes back and a vice principal comes back and says to the teacher, what did you do to make that kid do that? Or what else could you have tried to get the kid to pass your class? You know what I'm saying? We got a little bit of a problem here, you know, because one side is getting hammered, which is the educators, and the other side is being emboldened to behave badly and not be accountable and not perform. And thus, here we are a decade later with kids that are less able and more entitled. And that's not good.
And it makes no sense, Angel, too, Dan, right? Because at the same time, what you're talking about is accountability. And I remember one conversation I had with Dan is there's a reason why accountability exists, right? Because accountability means is that this is what you were told to do. This is what you agreed to do, right? And therefore, if you don't meet your end of the bargain, what do you think is going to happen, right? And it's so interesting that these problems only exist in education because outside education, everyone gets it. No matter what state you're in, no matter what language you're in, what cultural background, accountability is accountability. So it just mind boggles me that a student who could be a senior, they can goof off, right? And just skate by. And all of a sudden reality hits them that when they have a part-time job and they're late or they're fooling around, they think that they can just hold that job. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen at all. And that really goes to show that this problem exists in education. And the reason why it does exist is because all these policies are in place to ensure.
And when you put your foot down and you say the kid has got to do this, you know, the kid has got to show up to class, the kid has got to do their classwork. And if they don't do it, they don't pass. And then next thing you know, there's all sorts of pressure. What else can you do to get the kid to pass? What else can you do now? What can you do to get the kid to pass?
That's enabling.
And then it's enabling. It's totally, and then the kid goes, we're setting the kids up. They go off to, like Dan just said, they go off to the workforce, and then their boss says, you got to be here on time. Really?
Ain't happening.
I got to be there on time?
So why, obviously, I mean, to all the audience of Expansive Network, I mean, I'm sure that you're enjoying this conversation. These two gentlemen over here, they not only live passionately their lives and their education roles, but also they know a lot about it. And you just touched upon something extremely important. Why is this only happening in education? Why is this only happening in education? What is that those politicians have onto education that they don't have on other areas of our society? What's your take on this?
Great question, Angel. The truth hurts, right, Dan? This is what happens. Let me break it down. Companies, right? T-Mobile, Verizon, right? Walmart. They want to know what exactly is working, what exactly is not working, so that way that they can make the decisions, right? And you only know that if you have the actual truth and once the data comes in. The problem in education across the board, I don't care if it's a working good suburban school or school district or a very urban setting. The problem is that they don't want the teachers, the educators all in to start reporting every single thing that happens in the school, because if it does, then they know what the actual problem is. And then therefore, if they write it up, they have the data, they have to submit that to the State Department of Education, which therefore, okay, all this is happening. What are you doing to try to correct it? Therefore, they get no funding. So a perfect example, okay? And this is a problem in this state. If you have a student that is failing, 0 does not exist. 0 is a value. Yeah. 0 actually has an actual value. It means that there's nothing there for a variety of reasons. So if you gave a test to someone and they chose not to put anything in, therefore, by logic, it should be at 0. No, they're not giving them 0. The minimum amount of score that a teacher has to give, and again, this is all like in-house, is 40%. You have to give them a 40, so that way that student has enough time to make that grade up. But in reality, that is not reality. So
not in the real world.
That's a very small thing, right? That happens in education, right? That times that by other like in-house like keeping, like in-house bookkeeping, that drives people insane. Like, no, this is wrong. This is wrong, you know?
Yep.
And a lot of it has to deal with not treating schooling with respect in terms of like holding students accountable. I think that there should be fines, just like how it is like in the real world. You know, if you go over the speed limit, you get pulled over, there's a fine, right? Students, especially in the middle school, high school, like they do in Texas, like in your state, Angel, I'm assuming that there is like a school court, right? Where there's like an actual judge that if a student would have missed X amount of days, you know, on purpose, not because of, you know,
you're sent to the constable,
whatever, they actually go to court, right? And
totally.
There's a judge that's there, and the judge will issue a fine to the student or to the parent,
to the family,
right? There goes that accountability piece, right? But we're not there yet.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what do you think as a final question, because you have been pointing at the book all the time, we're talking about several things and you were saying, yeah, it's in the book. So just to finalize, because it's crazy, we've been almost an hour. It's amazing how time flies when I speak with you guys. But what would you say, or what would you say this book is going to bring to the teachers and to the paraeducators here in this country?
Acknowledgement. All the stuff that people have been saying in the articles is in this book. Resources and just simple free strategies in terms of how can we make this better just by spending more time, acknowledgement, how to establish communication that is not superficial, but real good, wholesome communication. You know,
and I would say it's also a very light approach. Thank God, because we don't have enough of that in education these days. Everything's so stressful. It's a very light approach about having a little bit of more fun while building positive working relationships, which will, in the end, benefit students.
Awesome. Excellent. So if people would like to buy the book, if people would like to know more about you, Daniel Blanchard, or you, Daniel Flores, what's the best way to find you? Where can people go to find you, and where can they buy your book?
The book is on Amazon. So they can easily find the book on Amazon and probably any other major distributors. They can find me at my website at granddaddysecrets.com. And Dan?
Absolutely. And then I'm also in the process of trying to establish my own webpage. But if people want to give me a ring, my cell is 860-938-4655. If they want to reach me by email, it's Dan R. Flores, Flores, at yahoo.com. Actually, Dan R. Flores 123 at yahoo.com. And they can send me an email. I'm always available to have a chit chat, answer any questions that they may do have. And soon, Dan and I will be having our own official webpage, so that way people can go and see the other resources that we have. We are creating and also finalizing a brand new book based on professional development. Me and Dan are also planning to create some possible podcasts and webcasts, and have some people over, such as you, Angel, to really go in depth in terms of the education and really, bring to light, because this is something that everybody has a best interest in, right? Because Totally. It all starts in schools.
Totally. I couldn't agree more. So Daniel Blanchard, Daniel Flores, thank you very much for being with us today. It's been a pleasure. We talk about education all the time at many different levels. Throughout the last 3 years, we are here at Expansion Network. We've been talking about children. We've been talking about, what has been happening in the world. As you know, I'm very, very sensitive. And Expansion Network, in this acceleration, the consciousness of humanity, we believe that we really have to focus on those kids, these children, the educational system in this country. Because it's definitely somewhere where, as you very well said, and I love that you said it yourselves, we don't know what's going on, but this is only happening in education. So thank you very much, Daniel and Daniel. Thank you for being with us today. This is your home. Whenever you have any other thing to share with us, consider us your home. Thank you so much for being with us. And to the rest of the audience, I'm sure that you have enjoyed this conversation as much as we have here today. Enjoy the rest of the day. For you, have a great weekend. And see you soon.
Thank you, Angel.
Bye, Angel.
Thank you.